Prince disguised himself as a servant and couldn't believe what the cook revealed about his fiancée. Before we begin this beautiful period romance story, tell me in the comments where you're listening from. I love knowing where you're joining me from. The palace stirred early that morning, though the frost outside had not yet lifted. Servants hurried through the stone corridors carrying linens and silverware, preparing for another day of aristocratic demands. Prince Edmund moved among them with practiced calm, though his thoughts were anything but calm. His valet tightened the last button on his coat, while 3 advisors waited just beyond the doorway, ready to discuss arrangements for his upcoming wedding to Lady Eleanor. The ceremony was only weeks away, and each passing day tightened the invisible collar of duty around his neck. He forced himself to sit through the meetings. The advisors spoke of alliances, appearances, and schedules. They reminded him that Lady Eleanor came from a family of notable influence, that she was admired by every household worth knowing, and that he should be grateful for such a fortunate match. Edmund nodded when appropriate, though his mind wandered far from the table. Something in him resisted the idea of binding his life to hers. He could not explain it. Eleanor was graceful, elegant, and never said anything incorrect. And yet, beneath that impeccable composure, he sensed a chill that unsettled him. When the meeting ended, he excused himself, claiming he needed air. No one questioned him. No one ever did. As he walked through the inner courtyard, the cold wind stung his face, reminding him that he was still alive beneath the layers of expectation. His thoughts drifted back to the evening before, when he had accidentally overheard Eleanor speaking sharply to her maid. She had complained about the servants, calling them ungrateful creatures. Her tone held a cold amusement that sent a quiet shiver down Edmund's spine. He tried to dismiss it, but it lingered in his memory like an unpleasant scent. He lingered at the courtyard's edge until his breath calmed. The palace kitchens lay in the far wing, always humming with activity. From where he stood, he could hear faint echoes of pots clattering and cooks shouting instructions. Something about that distant noise felt strangely inviting, honest, unpolished, real, unlike the rehearsed smiles of the court. A quiet thought formed, one he had entertained before but never dared to pursue. What if he stepped beyond the gilded frame of his title? What if he saw the palace through other eyes, not as a prince but as one of the unseen hands who kept it alive? Before reason caught up with him, Edmund strode toward the service wing. He passed through the back corridors where servants moved swiftly, scarcely noticing him. He entered a small room and removed his embroidered coat. In its place, he found a plain linen shirt, likely belonging to one of the stable boys. He pulled it over his head, feeling the coarse fabric against his skin. He tied back his hair and hid the signet ring in his pocket. No one stopped him. A prince in plain clothes was simply another young man, and few in the service wing would dare look too closely. He stepped into the kitchens, and the world changed instantly. Heat washed over him. Steam billowed from cauldrons. Cooks hurried past carrying trays and baskets. No one bowed. No one looked at him with expectation. He might as well have been invisible. The sensation startled him, but he welcomed it. A tall woman with a stern voice approached him. She glanced at him once, saw only an unfamiliar worker, and thrust a sack of vegetables into his arms. "Take that to the table," she said briskly. He obeyed before he could think. The weight of the sack surprised him, and his arms strained under it, but he managed to carry it without stumbling. As he placed the vegetables on the table, he heard a quiet voice behind him. "You're holding those as if they're made of glass." He turned sharply. A young woman stood near a large chopping board, her sleeves rolled neatly, her expression calm and observant. She had a steady presence, unlike the bustling energy around her. She did not seem impressed by him, nor intimidated. She simply studied him, with clear eyes. He cleared his throat. "I suppose I'm not used to carrying produce." "That is obvious," she replied gently. "Try setting your feet apart. You'll find the weight easier that way." He followed her advice, and she nodded in approval before returning to her work. He watched her for a moment. She chopped vegetables with swift, practiced motions, her movements efficient and without fuss. She seemed much younger than the other cooks, but carried herself with quiet assurance. The head cook soon returned, frowning at Edmund's clumsy attempt to peel a carrot. She snatched the knife from his hand. "Have you never peeled anything in your life?" she exclaimed. The nearby servants burst into laughter. He felt heat rise to his face. He wanted to disappear. Marjorie, the girl at the chopping board, intervened. "Here," she said softly, stepping beside him. "Hold the knife like this." She guided his hand briefly, her touch light and respectful. Then she demonstrated the motion. "It's not about force, it's about rhythm." He tried again. The result was still imperfect, but better. She gave him an encouraging smile. Better. He found himself smiling back before he caught it. A moment later, a lady's maid entered the kitchen. Her gown shimmered despite the dim light. She wrinkled her nose at the heat and the scent of food. Her gaze swept over the servants with open disdain before settling on Marjorie. "You're the new one, aren't you?" the maid asked coolly. Marjorie kept her tone polite. "Yes, ma'am. I suppose you'll learn your place soon enough. Some of you forget yourselves far too easily." Marjorie dipped her head without reacting. Edmund felt anger rise in him, a rare and sharp emotion, yet he said nothing. A servant speaking against a noble's attendant would earn swift punishment. The maid then turned toward Edmund. "And who might you be?" He straightened instinctively. "Just a kitchen assistant," he replied carefully. She narrowed her eyes. "You carry yourself strangely for a kitchen boy." Her voice dripped with suspicion. "Lady Eleanor dislikes unfamiliar staff wandering about. I suggest you mind your steps." She left as quickly as she had arrived. Marjorie exhaled softly and returned to chopping. She did not comment on the maid's harshness, but Edmund sensed she was troubled. They worked in silence for a while. The kitchen roared with activity around them, yet he found himself continually drawn to her presence. There was something different about her. She did not flatter. She did not fear. She simply did her work with quiet dignity. He attempted to chop another vegetable, and it slid across the board, nearly falling off. Marjorie caught it and placed it back. "You're trying too hard," she said gently. "Let the knife do the work." He chuckled quietly. "I fear I may be hopeless here." "No one is hopeless," she replied, "only inexperienced." Her tone held no judgment, only truth. Later, when most of the staff were busy preparing for the noon meal, Marjorie stepped closer to him. Her voice was soft enough that only he could hear. "What is a man like you doing here?" His heart stopped. For a moment he could not breathe. She looked at him steadily, waiting. Her gaze was not accusing, merely curious. I don't understand what you mean," he replied too quickly. She raised an eyebrow. "Your hands are too clean, your posture is too formal, and you speak as if you've never been scolded in your life." "I assure you, I have been scolded today," he said, attempting humor. She did not laugh. Instead, her tone softened even more. "If you're hiding from something, be careful. The palace is not kind to those who wander without belonging." He swallowed. Her words felt heavier than she knew. "I appreciate the warning." Before he could say more, the head cook shouted at him again. "Boy, fetch the bucket from the pantry before someone spills something disastrous." Edmund hurried to obey, grateful for the interruption. The pantry was dim and quiet compared to the bustling kitchen. He found the bucket and lifted it, surprised again by the weight. As he turned, he heard footsteps behind him. Marjorie stood in the doorway, her expression unreadable. She stepped inside, closing the door halfway behind her. For a moment, she said nothing. Then she looked straight into his eyes and spoke in a careful whisper. "People hide things in this palace. Some hide them very well, but secrets have a way of slipping out at the worst moment." His throat tightened. "What are you trying to tell me?" She hesitated. "I heard something last night, something I wish I had not heard." He set down the bucket slowly. "What was it?" She shook her head. "I shouldn't say. It's not my place. But it concerns Lady Eleanor and the man who is to marry her." His pulse quickened. "What did you hear?" Marjorie stepped closer. Her hands trembled slightly. She opened her mouth to speak, then froze, her eyes widening in alarm. Someone was standing just outside the pantry door. "I think we're being watched," she whispered. The pantry door stood half-closed, and Marjorie's breath caught as a shadow shifted on the other side. Edmund stepped forward instinctively, though he reminded himself he was supposed to be nothing more than a servant boy. He kept his voice low. "Who's there?" No answer came. The shadow disappeared down the hallway with quick, light footsteps. Marjorie pressed a hand to her chest, steadying herself. Whoever it was, they moved like someone accustomed to listening behind doors. Edmund felt the weight of her fear more sharply than his own. "We should return to the kitchen before someone suspects us," Marjorie whispered. He nodded. They stepped out together, careful to appear busy. The kitchen had grown louder, filled with cooks preparing trays for the midday meal. No one seemed to notice their late return, though the head cook gave Edmund a suspicious glance. She barked an order for him to scrub the large copper pot near the hearth. As he knelt beside the pot, Marjorie passed behind him, placing a basket on the table. She did not speak, but her presence steadied him. He scrubbed clumsily, irritated by the unpleasant scraping sound echoing in the room. He had never been required to clean anything so thoroughly in his life. After several minutes, the head cook approached and shouted over the noise. "What on earth are you doing? Are you trying to ruin the finish on that pot?" Edmund froze, holding the scrub brush awkwardly. "I was told to clean it." "You clean it, not punish it," she snapped. The kitchen erupted in laughter again. This time the mockery stung more deeply. Edmund lowered his head and resumed scrubbing more carefully. His hands trembled with frustration he dared not show. Marjorie appeared at his side, quiet as a breath. She leaned down as if examining the pot, whispering, "Move your wrist like this. You'll stop scraping the metal." Her guidance spared him further humiliation, though he still felt every set of eyes pressing on the back of his neck. A young footman carrying a tray paused nearby, watching Edmund struggle. "Must be your first week," he said smugly. "Try not to break anything important, eh?" Edmund bit back a response. Marjorie cast the footman a brief, firm glance. "Go deliver your tray before it grows cold," she said gently. He blinked, surprised by her tone, then hurried off. Edmund felt a rare warmth bloom in his chest. She defended him without hesitation, though she barely knew him. When the pot finally gleamed to the head cook's satisfaction, Marjorie guided him to the sideboards where vegetables waited to be chopped. She positioned herself near him, offering quiet instruction. Her movements were swift, but never impatient. She spoke only when necessary. "A steady blade makes steady work. Don't grip the handle so tightly. Keep your fingers clear of the edge." Her advice was calm, practical, and free of judgment. He watched her hands for a moment. "Your skill is remarkable," he said softly. She shrugged. "Years of practice. Cooking is the only trade I've ever known. Do you enjoy it?" "Sometimes. Other times it is simply what keeps a roof above my head." Her words carried a quiet sadness. Edmund wanted to ask more, but the noise of approaching footsteps interrupted them. A young maid, flushed and breathless, entered the kitchen calling for attention. "Lady Eleanor's maid is looking for someone," she announced. "She seems in a dreadful mood." The cooks exchanged wary glances. Marjorie lowered her eyes, returning to her work. Edmund felt unease ripple through him. Lady Eleanor's maid had already looked at him strangely earlier that morning. Now she was searching again. A moment later, the maid swept into the room like a cold gust of wind. Her voice rang sharply over the clatter. "His lordship's assistant. Where is the new kitchen boy?" Edmund stiffened as every head turned in his direction. The maid arched an eyebrow and beckoned him forward. "You? Come here. Lady Eleanor wishes to speak privately with the staff assisting today." Marjorie's hand paused mid-motion. Her eyes flicked briefly to Edmund, a silent warning. He forced a calm expression and approached the maid. "I'll take him," she said briskly, turning on her heel. Edmund followed her through the corridor, heart pounding. "What does Lady Eleanor want?" he asked cautiously. The maid smirked without slowing her pace. "You seemed unfamiliar earlier, and her ladyship dislikes unfamiliar faces hovering near important rooms. She simply wants to know who has been hired recently. Nothing more." Her tone suggested otherwise. Edmund kept quiet, focusing on the weight of each step as they climbed the narrow staircase leading to the upper servants' hall. Just outside the parlour door, the maid paused. She folded her hands neatly and looked him over. "Stand straight. Answer promptly. And mind yourself. Lady Eleanor has little patience today." She tapped lightly on the door, then gestured for him to enter alone. He stepped inside, shocked by the contrast between the bustling kitchens and the stillness of this elegant room. Lady Eleanor stood near a small table, her posture immaculate, her expression composed yet expectant. She studied him with cool curiosity. "Close the door," she said, without turning. He obeyed. For a moment she remained silent, observing him with unsettling precision. Then she asked, "How long have you been employed here?" Edmund chose his words carefully. "Not long, my lady." "Your speech is refined," she remarked. Unusual for a kitchen worker. He lowered his gaze. I was taught by a former employer to speak properly. She stepped closer, her eyes narrowing. And have you served in noble homes before? Some, he answered vaguely. She continued, circling him. Kitchen assistants have a habit of appearing where they are not meant to be, sometimes listening where they should not. She paused behind him. Have you heard anything inappropriate? Edmund's heartbeat thundered in his ears. He forced a steady tone. No, my lady. Her silence stretched uncomfortably long. At last she said, if ever you come across anything concerning, you will report it directly to me, do you understand? Yes, my lady. You may go. Edmund exited with controlled calm, though dread twisted his stomach. He hurried down the corridor, anxious to return to Marjorie. When he reached the kitchen wing, he found her preparing a tray of bread and broth for the servants' table. She looked up instantly. What did she ask? Only about my employment, he replied quietly. Nothing else. Marjorie's eyes searched his face. You're certain? He nodded, though the tension in his shoulders betrayed him. Before either could speak further, the head steward entered the kitchen with heavy footsteps. He scanned the room until his gaze fell on Edmund. You, the new assistant. Lady Eleanor requests your presence again this afternoon. Edmund's pulse quickened. Margaret's wooden spoon slipped slightly in her grasp. The steward continued, and she does not like to be kept waiting. He left without another word. Marjorie approached Edmund once more, her voice low. She asked for you twice in one morning. That is never a good sign. I know, he whispered. Marjorie hesitated, then added, perhaps she suspects something, or someone told her about the pantry. Edmund glanced around, lowering his voice even more. Someone was listening earlier. I saw their shadow. They may have gone straight to her. Marjorie swallowed, her worry plain. If she thinks you've heard anything you should not have... Edmund forced himself to remain calm. I'll be careful. He returned to chopping vegetables with her at the table, though neither could focus properly. Every sound from the corridor made them flinch. The kitchen felt smaller, louder, as though danger pressed against its walls. When a servant entered to fetch Marjorie for an errand, she gave Edmund a fleeting look of encouragement before stepping away. He watched her leave with a sinking heart, realizing how much her presence had become his anchor. Hours passed slowly. Edmund performed task after task, receiving fewer scoldings only because Marjorie's guidance had improved his efforts. Still, a strange pressure hung over him, and he knew it came from Lady Eleanor's attention. By late afternoon, the palace settled into a brief lull. Trays had been delivered, and the cooks were cleaning their workstations. Edmund wiped down the table, grateful for a moment of quiet. Marjorie returned just then, carrying a small crate of ingredients. She set it down and leaned close to him. I overheard something in the corridor. Lady Eleanor's maid said there would be new arrangements for the wedding supper, and she sounded threatened, as though something is happening that we do not see. Edmund tensed. The wedding plans had already been detailed weeks ago. Changing them meant something had shifted. Marjorie lowered her voice even further. I don't know what this means, but I feel it is tied to what I heard yesterday, and to your presence here. Edmund wanted to reassure her, but before he could speak, the kitchen door swung open with a loud creak. The same maid who had escorted him earlier stepped inside, her expression sharp and smug. The maid pointed directly at Edmund. You, Lady Eleanor requests you immediately, and she insists you come alone. The summons struck the kitchen like a sudden drop in temperature. Every servant went still. Marjorie's hand tightened around the wooden spoon she held, though she tried to hide the reaction. Edmund kept his expression neutral as the maid lifted her chin, waiting for him to obey. He wiped his hands on his apron and stepped forward with quiet steadiness. Very well, he said. The maid turned at once, expecting him to follow. Marjorie caught his sleeve for only a fraction of a second. Be careful, she murmured. She masked the words with a swift turn back to the work table, but he heard the tremor beneath them. Edmund followed the maid through corridors he normally passed as a prince, but today they felt different, foreign, accusatory. The hallway leading to the smaller reception rooms was lined with portraits of ancestors whose eyes seemed to judge him as he walked. He tried to quiet the pounding in his chest. Inside one of the side salons, Lady Eleanor waited near the hearth, her hands lightly clasped. The flames flickered against her perfectly arranged curls. She turned slowly as he stepped inside. Shut the door, she instructed. He did. For several long heartbeats, she simply watched him, studying him as if trying to place a memory that refused to surface. "You again," she said finally. "Twice in one day. Unusual for someone who arrived only recently." "I go where I am sent, my lady." "Do you?" she asked softly. "Or do you wander where you should not?" She took a step forward. Edmund kept his gaze down, careful to play the role he had chosen. The air between them felt tense, enclosed. "Tell me," she continued, "have you noticed anything inappropriate among the staff?" His stomach tightened. "No, my lady." Her eyes narrowed. "Not even whispers?" He shook his head. "I keep to my work." "Do you indeed?" She studied him another moment, then waved a hand dismissively. "You may go. But understand one thing clearly. I do not tolerate servants who step beyond their place. Nor do I forgive them." Edmund bowed briefly and exited with more composure than he felt. The moment the door closed, he drew a slow breath to steady himself. He hurried back to the kitchen wing, resisting the urge to run. When he entered, Marjorie glanced up instantly. Her shoulders eased, but only slightly. "What happened?" "Nothing of consequence," he said, lowering his voice. "But she is suspicious. I could feel it." Marjorie bit her lip, her eyes reflecting a mixture of worry and thoughtfulness. "There is more to this. I know it." The rest of the afternoon moved with the steady rhythm of kitchen work, though Edmund sensed tension humming beneath every task. Marjorie kept close enough to guide him without drawing attention. Each accidental brush of her sleeve against his sent an odd, warm pull through him. He tried to focus on chopping vegetables and preparing trays, but his mind drifted to Lady Eleanor's probing questions. When the evening meal approached, the pace in the kitchen quickened. Trays were arranged, broth was ladled into bowls, and bread was sliced in thick pieces. Edmund carried a heavy pot toward the serving hatch, moving slowly and trying not to spill. As he did, he heard two footmen whispering nearby. "Lady Eleanor met someone in the garden last night," one muttered. "Who?" asked the other. "A gentleman. That's all I know. But not the prince." Edmund forced himself to keep moving, though the words pierced him. He reached the serving area, set down the pot, and returned as calmly as he could. Marjorie was stirring a large kettle of soup. She looked up the moment he approached. "Are you all right?" she asked under her breath. He hesitated. Then he nodded. "For now." Marjorie opened her mouth as if to say more, but the head cook barked an order across the room. "Enough whispered conversations. We need the trays out now." Marjorie went to assist with plating. Edmund moved to help her, relieved to work beside her again. She guided him through the motions, portion the roasted meat, arrange the vegetables, wipe the edge of the plate. Their hands moved in quiet coordination. But even amid the bustle, Marjorie kept glancing toward the kitchen door, as if expecting someone to enter with bad news. Edmund felt the same unease settling over him like a low fog. At last the trays were carried out by the footman. The kitchen quieted somewhat as the hardest part of the evening rush ended. Servants finally allowed themselves to breathe. Marjorie filled 2 wooden bowls with broth and placed them on a small side table. "Here," she said. "You look exhausted." He accepted the bowl gratefully. He had never eaten in the kitchens before. He sat on a low bench beside her, feeling strangely content despite the tension of the day. They ate in silence for a moment. The warmth of the broth steadied him. Marjorie broke the quiet first. "When I said earlier that someone was listening outside the pantry, I meant what I said. Someone moved quickly when they realized I'd noticed." "I believe you," Edmund replied. "And I fear they reported something to Lady Eleanor." Marjorie's shoulders tensed. "I have a thought, though I cannot prove it. Her maid is fiercely loyal to her. If she sensed anything out of place, she would stir trouble," Edmund finished. Marjorie nodded slowly. "Yes, and if she learned I overheard something yesterday—" "What did you hear?" Edmund asked softly. She hesitated. "I will tell you, but not here, not while so many ears are near." He leaned closer. "Then where?" "A quiet place, perhaps the storeroom later, once the evening work has passed." He agreed with a small nod. They finished their meal just as the head cook called for the washing to begin. Marjorie gathered bowls while Edmund scrubbed the large copper pot again, this time with more confidence. She passed by him occasionally, her hand brushing his arm with each exchange of utensils. It steadied him more than he liked to admit. After a long stretch of cleaning, most of the staff began drifting off to their quarters. The kitchen dimmed as lanterns were extinguished. Only a faint golden glow remained near the washing area. Marjorie approached him quietly. "The storeroom will be empty now. No one goes there at this hour." He nodded, wiping his hands on a cloth. They walked together down the narrow hall that led to the storerooms. The corridor felt colder than the kitchen. The floorboards creaked beneath their steps. When they reached the final door, Marjorie paused. "Inside," she said softly. He entered first. The room was small and filled with sacks of flour and crates of dried herbs. She closed the door behind them, leaving only a faint sliver of light entering through the high window. "Tell me now," Edmund said gently. "What did you overhear?" Marjorie inhaled deeply, steadying her courage. "Yesterday afternoon, Lady Eleanor and her mother spoke in the antechamber. They did not see me." She began slowly, her voice trembling with the memory. "They spoke of you, and not kindly." Edmund waited, tension climbing up his spine. Her mother asked if she was ready for the wedding. Eleanor laughed and said she had no intention of honoring the vows, that she would keep her own company. She said you were easily managed, someone who would ask no questions. Edmund felt the words like a blow. He knew Eleanor could be cold, but this revealed something darker. Marjorie continued softly, as though afraid the room might echo. "They spoke of influence, of using your title to strengthen their own standing. And Eleanor said, she said the crown needed a sweet face more than a devoted heart. It was all a game to them." Edmund lowered his head. For a moment, he could not speak. Marjorie reached out hesitantly. "I should not have heard it, but once I did. I knew I had to warn you, even before I suspected who you truly were." Edmund lifted his gaze to hers. "You did the courageous thing," he said softly, "and you risked much to tell me." Before she could answer, footsteps echoed down the hallway outside. Slow, distinct, drawing nearer. Marjorie's eyes widened. "Someone's coming." Edmund stepped toward the door, but Marjorie grasped his arm. "No, wait. If they find both of us here." The footsteps stopped directly outside the storeroom. A hand pressed against the door. A shadow shifted beneath it. Marjorie's breath caught. The doorknob began to turn. The door creaked open only an inch before a sharp voice called from down the corridor. "Who left this lantern burning?" The hand on the doorknob froze. A different servant answered, muffling the voice of the one outside the storeroom. Edmund and Marjorie stood motionless, barely breathing. After a tense moment, the footsteps drifted away, fading into the long hallway. Only when silence settled did Marjorie allow herself a trembling exhale. Edmund touched her arm lightly. It was close. Too close. She nodded, regaining herself. "We cannot stay here. Someone is watching you, or listening for you." "No," Edmund said quietly. "They were listening for you." "Her powers of suspicion do not fall on me alone." Marjorie lowered her eyes. "Perhaps, but you carry the greater risk. If Lady Eleanor suspects your disguise—" "She already suspects something," he murmured, "but she cannot name it." Marjorie looked toward the closed door. Leaving that room felt unwise, yet remaining invited danger. Edmund whispered, "We exit separately, one after the other. You go first." She hesitated. "And you?" "I'll wait. Give the halls time to clear." Marjorie stepped out cautiously. Edmund listened for her footsteps, counting to keep himself steady. When the sound of her shoes faded, he slipped into the corridor and returned to the kitchen wing by a different route, his pulse quickening every time he saw a servant turn a corner. The kitchen was calmer than before, filled only with the faint clatter of dishes being stacked for the night. Marjorie was wiping a counter as though she had been working there all along. She met his gaze only briefly before lowering her head, ensuring no suspicion fell on either of them. "Are you unharmed?" she whispered when she passed close. "Yes." "And you?" She nodded, though her eyes flickered with lingering fear. "We shall have to be more cautious." From across the kitchen, a harsh voice cut through the quiet. "Marjorie!" They both stiffened. Lady Eleanor's maid swept into the room, her elegant shoes clicking loudly on the stone. Every servant straightened at once. The maid's gaze landed on Marjorie with chilling precision. You, Lady Eleanor, requires additional assistance immediately. Marjorie blinked. Me? I've had no assignment to her service. You do now, the maid replied curtly. Follow me. Edmund watched, jaw tight, as Marjorie obeyed. She walked with measured calm, but he saw her fingers stiffen along the hem of her apron. The maid did not once look back at him, yet Edmund sensed she knew he was watching. When Marjorie disappeared through the doorway, he forced himself to continue cleaning. Pretending to be a servant was suddenly unbearable. Here, in the kitchen, he was meant to remain unseen. But every instinct in him fought the idea of letting her face Eleanor alone. After several anxious minutes, one of the younger scullery maids approached him quietly. The new cook. She's been taken upstairs. Lady Eleanor's in a temper. Edmund swallowed hard. Thank you, he said softly. The girl frowned. You worry for her. He hesitated. She is kind to me. The maid studied him for a moment, then dipped her head and returned to her tasks. Another half-hour passed before hurried footsteps echoed in the hallway. Edmund turned toward the sound just as Marjorie stepped into the kitchen again. She looked pale, her composure fragile but intact. He crossed the room at once, but she subtly shook her head, signaling caution. Not here, she murmured. They kept a respectful distance until the head cook dismissed the staff for the evening. Only once most servants had left did Marjorie approach Edmund near the back of the kitchen where the lanterns burned low. What happened? He asked. Marjorie drew a slow breath. Lady Eleanor questioned me about my previous households, about who I served, about my habits. She asked if I had been wandering corridors without permission. Edmund clenched his jaw. Did she accuse you of anything? Not directly, but her questions felt probing, as though she believed I already knew something. He stepped closer. Did you deny it? Of course. I said I heard nothing, but I fear she did not believe me. Edmund ran a hand through his hair in frustration, forgetting for a moment that a servant would rarely make such a gesture. Marjorie noticed and gently touched his hand to lower it. Careful. Someone might see. He nodded, chastened. You should not have been questioned at all. I've placed you in danger. Marjorie shook her head softly. No, I chose to warn you, and I would choose it again. He stared at her, struck by the quiet strength in her voice. She met his gaze steadily, and something unspoken passed between them, a recognition neither dared name. Before he could speak, one of the older kitchen maids called from across the room, locking the back door for the night. The moment was broken, and Marjorie stepped aside, returning to her station. The last tasks were finished quickly. Lanterns were snuffed. The cooks drifted out, wishing one another a good night. Edmund had not yet decided whether he should return to the cellar where he had been assigned to sleep or stay near the kitchen to ensure Marjorie's safety, but fate made the choice for him. As Marjorie reached for her shawl, the head steward suddenly appeared in the doorway, breathless and stern. You, the new assistant. Edmund straightened instantly. Her ladyship has requested to speak with you again, he said. At once. The air seemed to still. Marjorie's head snapped toward him, panic flashing briefly in her eyes. Edmund forced a calm expression, though his heart hammered against his ribs. When the steward stepped aside to let him pass, Marjorie moved toward him as if drawn by instinct. She spoke in the faintest whisper, her voice raw with fear. This is a trap, she whispered. Edmund did not answer Marjorie's warning. He couldn't. The head steward stood only a few steps away, watching with narrowed eyes, suspicious of even the slightest hesitation. Edmund straightened his shoulders, nodded once to Marjorie, and followed the steward out of the kitchen. The corridor felt colder than before, as though each stone had absorbed the weight of the danger gathering around him. Lamps flickered weakly along the walls. No visitors lingered at this hour. Only the silence moved beside them, like an unwelcome escort. Is Lady Eleanor displeased? Edmund asked, keeping his tone humble, careful. The steward did not look back. Her ladyship did not say. Only that you are to report to her at once. Edmund lowered his head in a servant's posture, but inside every sense sharpened. He knew Lady Eleanor must have heard something, suspected something, or wished to use him in her web of inquiries. Whatever the reason, Marjorie was right. This summons had teeth. They reached the smaller receiving room where Eleanor often spoke with her attendants. The steward knocked softly, then pushed the door open. "Enter," he told Edmund. Lady Eleanor stood before the window, the faint glow of moonlight outlining her silhouette. She turned with a serene smile that did not reach her eyes. "There you are," she said, her voice as smooth as polished stone. "Come closer." Edmund obeyed, stopping at a respectful distance. He kept his posture modest and unassuming. "I find it curious," she began, "how often you cross my path, considering you have been in service only a short time." Her head tilted slightly. "Tell me, where exactly did you work before you came here?" "In several households, my lady." "Names?" He hesitated, just a breath too long. "Ah," she moved closer. "Hesitation never bodes well." Edmund swallowed. "My memory falters under pressure, my lady." A faint smile touched her lips. "Then perhaps you will recall better under closer supervision." She walked past him, her perfume subtle yet sharp. "You may go, but I will be watching you." He bowed and exited, keeping his step steady until the door closed behind him. Only then did he allow himself a quiet breath. Eleanor did not yet know the truth, but she sensed danger in the shadows near her, and she would not rest until she uncovered it. Edmund hurried back toward the service wing, aware that the steward had returned to other duties and no one followed him. The moment he reached the kitchen door, Marjorie appeared from the shadows, eyes wide with worry. "What happened?" Her voice was low, trembling. "She asked questions," he said. "Nothing direct, but she knows something is amiss." Marjorie exhaled shakily. "I feared as much. Every instinct tells me she will strike at the first opportunity." He stepped closer without meaning to, drawn by the sincerity in her gaze. "I will not allow her to harm you." Marjorie shook her head. "You cannot protect me." "Not without revealing who you are." "Perhaps that time is near," he murmured. Her breath caught, but before she could answer, footsteps echoed from the far end of the corridor. Both turned sharply. A pair of kitchen maids passed by, speaking softly about linens that needed mending. They barely noticed Edmund or Marjorie, yet the moment of danger urged them apart. Marjorie forced a small, strained smile. "You must return to your quarters. If you linger, someone will notice." He nodded reluctantly. "And you?" "I'll finish the last tasks and retire upstairs." She paused, glancing over her shoulder. "Edmund, be careful. Every move you make is watched, and yours as well," he replied softly. For a moment, neither moved. Then a distant bell chimed the hour, breaking the fragile quiet. They parted with a silent understanding neither dared name. Edmund made his way to the servants' quarters. Though he scarcely noticed the passages he walked, his mind replayed Marjorie's voice, her courage, her fear, and the truth she had revealed. The thought of Eleanor mocking him, mocking the vows meant to bind them, felt like a slow tightening around his chest. And Marjorie, she was the only person who had shown him honesty without condition. He lay on the narrow cot in the dim room the servants shared, but sleep did not come. Every whisper in the hall sounded like suspicion. Every footstep felt like someone discovering the truth. By dawn he had slept scarcely an hour. The kitchen stirred early again. When Edmund arrived, Marjorie was already there, sleeves rolled and hair tied back, moving with brisk precision. But her face held a shadow he had not seen before. "Rough night?" he asked gently. She glanced up and attempted a small smile. "It seems the palace walls do not rest." He stood beside her, helping with the morning tasks. Her fingers brushed his once, unintentionally, and she quickly pulled away, cheeks warming. He wanted to say something, anything to ease the tension growing between them, but the head cook's sharp call sent them back to work. As the morning progressed, the palace hummed with subtle unrest. Footmen hurried with notes. Maids whispered behind their hands. Even the head cook paused more than once to listen for distant sounds. Marjorie eventually found a quiet moment near the shelves lined with spices. Edmund approached her, carrying a basket. "We cannot continue like this," he said quietly. "You are in danger because of me." Marjorie shook her head. "I put myself in danger by speaking the truth. That was my choice. But you should not bear the consequences alone." "Nor should you," she replied softly. Her eyes lowered. "Edmund, if anyone discovers the truth of who you are, they will dismiss me in disgrace, or worse. And I do not fear dismissal as much as I fear harming you." He felt the words like a pull deep within him. Her concern was not about position or survival, it was about him. And the realization struck him with unexpected force. "Marjorie," he said, stepping closer, "I cannot let that happen, not when—" A loud crash echoed from the corridor. Both spun toward the sound. A servant raced into the kitchen, panting. "Lady Eleanor seeks the new assistant," he shouted. "She wants him brought to her chambers immediately." Marjorie's face went pale. No, not her chambers. "Edmund, this is no simple questioning. This is—" He touched her arm. "I know." The head cook stormed toward Edmund. "Fiancée, stop standing about. Go. When her ladyship calls, you run." Marjorie stepped forward impulsively. "Mistress, perhaps he—" The head cook cut her off. "Enough. Do not interfere." Marjorie froze, unable to say more. Edmund looked at her one last time. A brief, wordless exchange, fear, determination, regret, flashed between them. Then he left the kitchen with steady steps, even as dread scraped at him. He followed the servant through the corridors leading to the upper floors. When they reached the entrance to the private wing, the servant bowed and retreated, leaving Edmund alone. Edmund drew a steadying breath and stepped inside. Lady Eleanor stood in the center of the room, her expression poised but cold as winter marble. She dismissed her maid with a flick of her hand, leaving them alone. "You have been very busy," she said in a quiet voice, "busier than a kitchen servant ever should be." He bowed his head. "I only serve where ordered, my lady." "Do you?" Her eyes narrowed with unsettling precision. "Or do you serve someone else?" Edmund said nothing. Eleanor circled him slowly. Her voice dropped to a whisper. "There is something you are hiding, and I will find it." He remained still, forcing calm into every breath. She stopped behind him. "When I know what your secret is, I will decide what must be done with you." He turned slightly, unable to stop himself. "And what would that be, my lady?" Eleanor smiled faintly. "That depends on how useful you prove yourself." A knock sounded at the door. Eleanor's maid entered without waiting for permission, breathless. "My lady, you asked to be informed if any servant approached the lower stairwell." "Well, someone did." Edmund's heart clenched. "It was the new cook," the maid said. "Marjorie." Eleanor's expression sharpened with dangerous interest. "Bring her here. Immediately." The maid hurried out to fetch Marjorie, leaving a sharp, echoing quiet in the chamber. Edmund felt the stillness settle over him like a tightening cord. Lady Eleanor walked toward the window, her hands clasped neatly behind her back. Her reflection in the glass revealed a faint, thoughtful smile. "So," she murmured, "the little cook wanders where she should not. How curious." Edmund lowered his head, forcing himself to breathe evenly. He could not reveal his identity. Not yet, not here. But every instinct screamed for him to get Marjorie away from Eleanor's reach. The chamber door opened again. This time Marjorie stepped inside, guided by the maid who kept a firm grip on her arm. Marjorie's eyes widened slightly when she saw Edmund standing opposite Eleanor, but she kept her composure. She dipped her head in a respectful bow. "You sent for me, my lady?" Eleanor turned slowly, the faint trace of a smile sharpening. "Yes. I noticed you in the lower stairwell, though you had no tasks assigned there. I found that rather interesting." Marjorie kept her gaze lowered. "I was sent to retrieve a basket of linens." "By whom?" Marjorie hesitated only for a breath. "By the head laundry maid." Eleanor stepped closer. "Is that so? Then I suppose she will confirm it." Marjorie's fingers tightened around her apron, but her voice remained steady. "Yes, my lady." The maid beside the door shifted, clearly doubtful, but silent. Eleanor circled Marjorie with the same slow, assessing grace she had used on Edmund earlier. "Tell me," she said. "I have heard you came from a rather modest household before your employment here." "Yes, my lady." "And you served families of lesser rank?" Marjorie nodded. "Then tell me this. How does a girl accustomed to simple service manage to navigate this palace so easily?" Eleanor's voice chilled slightly. "I find your movements refined. Too refined for one without education." Marjorie swallowed. "I learned quickly, my lady. Most servants must." Eleanor's gaze narrowed, sharp as a blade without ever becoming one. Too quickly, perhaps. Edmund stepped forward, bowing respectfully before speaking. "My lady, if I may—" Silence. Eleanor lifted a hand, and he froze mid-sentence. "I did not give you leave to speak." Edmund lowered his head, fury burning beneath his ribs. Eleanor returned her focus to Marjorie. "You were seen speaking to this boy often." "Unnecessarily often." Marjorie drew a breath. "We work at the same table, my lady." "It is natural that—" "Again too quickly," Eleanor murmured, "and with too much ease." Marjorie said nothing more, but the faintest tremor in her hands betrayed her. Eleanor's tone softened, though it only made the threat beneath it clearer. "My dear, this palace rewards loyalty, but it never tolerates deceit. If there is anything you wish to tell me, now would be the time." Marjorie lifted her chin slightly, gathering her strength. "I am loyal, my lady. I have nothing to hide." A heavy silence followed. Eleanor studied her face, searching for cracks that did not exist. After a long moment, she turned away with a displeased sigh. "Very well," she said. "I will question the laundry maid myself. Until then, you may both return to your duties." "Both." Edmund saw the faint twist of Eleanor's mouth as she said it. She did not believe Marjorie, and now Edmund feared she believed even less. Marjorie bowed again and stepped backward. Edmund followed her lead. They exited the chamber together, but only when the maid shut the door behind them and footsteps faded down the corridor did Marjorie release a quivering breath. She leaned lightly against the wall. Her face was pale, her hands shaking despite her attempt to hide it. Edmund stepped closer, his voice barely above a whisper. "Marjorie, what were you doing at the lower stairwell?" "Truly?" She looked up at him, guilt flickering through her eyes. "I wanted to find someone who might know whether Lady Eleanor had reason to question you. I thought if I understood why she was looking for you, I could warn you." Edmund's heart tightened. "You risked being caught." "For me?" She nodded once, quietly. "I could not stand aside." He longed to tell her then and there who he truly was, to pull down every lie and shield her from everything. But the corridor was too open. Anyone could appear at any moment. He forced himself to stay silent. They walked back toward the kitchen wing, passing through stairwells where servants hurried about their tasks, oblivious to the danger coiling around the two of them. When they reached the lower hall, Marjorie paused. "We cannot continue like this," she whispered. "Lady Eleanor's suspicion grows every hour. If she believes I am tied to you, she will—" Edmund stepped closer, unable to keep the urgency from his voice. "I won't let her harm you." Marjorie shook her head. "You cannot promise that while hiding who you are. And the more she presses, the more likely she will discover your secret. Or mine." He opened his mouth, but she gently raised a hand. "Please, let me speak." He fell silent. Her voice dropped to a trembling whisper. "Ever since I told you what I overheard, this shadow has followed me. Every question, every glance. I fear it will only worsen, and if she believes I am lying to her—" "You didn't lie," Edmund said quickly. "You protected the truth." Marjorie gave a sad, small smile. "That is not a comfort in a palace that punishes honesty." He felt a sharp ache in his chest. "Marjorie, Before he could finish, the kitchen door burst open. The head cook marched into the corridor, her face flushed with irritation. "There you are, both of you. The midday preparations are behind schedule and half the chopping is undone. Do you think work waits for your strolls through the corridors?" Marjorie lowered her head at once. "Forgive me. I was summoned upstairs." "Then move faster," the head cook snapped. Edmund and Marjorie exchanged one last brief, desperate glance before entering the kitchen again. The hours that followed passed in a blur of frantic activity. Pots boiled, knives clattered, trays piled higher than usual. But beneath all of it, Edmund watched Marjorie. Every time Lady Eleanor's maid appeared in the doorway, Marjorie stiffened. Every whisper of footsteps in the hall made her eyes flick upward. He saw the weight she carried, and he knew he had placed much of it upon her shoulders. As he reached for a stack of dishes, Marjorie slipped beside him to hand him a cloth. Her fingers brushed his just for a heartbeat. "Edmund, meet me in the pantry when the kitchen settles," she whispered. "We cannot delay this any longer." He nodded once. The afternoon stretched on endlessly, but finally the sounds began to fade. Servants retreated to other tasks. The heat eased. The kitchen emptied little by little until only a few lingering maids remained. At last, Marjorie slipped into the pantry. Edmund followed moments later, closing the door gently behind him. She turned to him, her breath unsteady. Her voice cracked softly when she spoke. "Edmund, I may not have another chance to say this, He stepped toward her, heart pounding. "Marjorie!" She lifted her hand to silence him. "No. Let me finish." She swallowed hard. "Whatever comes next, whatever Lady Eleanor discovers or demand, I need you to know that I do not regret warning you. Not for a moment." His chest tightened painfully. Her courage, her honesty, her fear, all of it reached him with a force he had not been prepared to feel. Marjorie exhaled, as though releasing a secret that had weighed on her for days. "If I could choose again, I would still speak the truth, even if it costs me my place here." Edmund opened his mouth, but the pantry door burst open before a single word could escape. Lady Eleanor herself stood in the doorway. Lady Eleanor filled the doorway with a stillness that froze both Edmund and Marjorie where they stood. Her gown brushed the pantry threshold, her expression sharp with controlled fury. She glanced once between them, slow, assessing, then stepped fully inside, closing the door behind her with chilling precision. "How touching," she said softly. A kitchen boy and a cook whispering secrets in the shadows. Marjorie kept her head lowered, though her breath shook. "My lady, we were only—" "Do not insult me with excuses," Eleanor cut in. Her gaze slid to Edmund. "And you, everywhere I turn in this palace I find you lurking in some corner, listening, watching, as if you have nothing better to do." Edmund kept his posture humble, deliberately dull. "I obey where the kitchen sends me, my lady." Eleanor gave a short, humorless laugh. "A lie so thin I can see daylight through it." Marjorie's hands tightened at her sides. "My lady, if you have doubts about my conduct—" "Doubts?" Eleanor turned sharply toward her. "My dear girl, I have far more than doubts. I have observations, I have instincts, and I have a memory sharp enough to notice patterns where others overlook them." She stepped closer to Marjorie, forcing her back a step. Two servants forming an attachment, unwise. Two servants meeting privately, foolish. But two servants who appear every time a whisper reaches my halls. That, my dear, is something else entirely. Edmund felt Marjorie's fear like a physical weight. He tried to speak. "My lady, if there is some misunderstanding—" "Silence," Eleanor snapped, her voice so sudden the air seemed to crack. "You will both answer when I ask, not before." Marjorie's eyes darted briefly toward Edmund, as if begging him not to speak again. He lowered his gaze, restraining the instinct to protect her by revealing everything. Not yet. Not in a pantry with Eleanor standing between them and the world. Eleanor folded her hands. "Let us begin with a simple question. What were you speaking of just now?" Marjorie took a trembling breath. "Only our duties, my lady." Eleanor's smile sharpened. "Duties? In here, alone, with the door closed. How extraordinary." She turned to Edmund again. "And you stand too straight for a servant. You speak too well. And you stare at me with a boldness no kitchen worker should possess." Edmund remained silent. Eleanor took another step closer, her voice dropping into a dangerous softness. "You think I do not see what is happening? You think I do not notice the eyes upon me? The whispers that follow me through corridors? I know someone has been listening, and I know that someone is very near." Marjorie swallowed hard. "My lady, I know nothing of whispers." "No?" Eleanor's eyes gleamed with cold certainty. "Then why is it that every time I question a servant, it is you who looks ready to faint?" Marjorie lowered her gaze, unable to hide the slight tremble in her hands. Eleanor watched it with satisfaction. "Yes, you tremble because you are hiding something. The only question left is what, and for whom?" Edmund finally spoke, quiet but steady. "If you believe I have misled you, my lady, then question me. She has done nothing wrong." "Wrong?" Eleanor tilted her head. "On the contrary, I believe she knows far too much." Marjorie's breath hitched, and for a moment Eleanor's eyes softened, not with mercy, but with the thrill of power. "Still," Eleanor continued, looking between them, "I am nothing if not fair. So I will give you one final chance. Speak now. What have you heard? Who have you spoken to? And why do you linger in places no servant should be?" Marjorie's voice was barely audible. "We linger nowhere, my lady." Helena stepped so close that Marjorie had no choice but to meet her gaze. "You lie poorly, a quality that will serve you badly in this palace." Marjorie's composure cracked, only slightly, but Eleanor saw it. "Ah," she whispered. There it is. Edmund fought to keep his breathing steady. He could not expose himself here. Not yet. But he could not let Eleanor break Marjorie either. Eleanor straightened, cold satisfaction radiating from her posture. I will speak with the king's steward. Some servants prove themselves unreliable and must be reassigned. Marjorie's face drained of colour. Reassigned, she whispered. Eleanor smiled, or dismissed entirely. For the good of the household, of course. Edmund stepped forward before he could stop himself. My lady, you cannot... She rounded on him instantly. And you forget yourself again? There is a reason kitchen boys are not granted opinions. Edmund felt the words strike deeper than she knew, because they were spoken to a prince disguised as a nobody. Yet he forced himself to bow. As he did, Marjorie took a shaky step toward Eleanor. My lady, please, if you must question someone, let it be me. I will answer anything you ask. Eleanor raised an eyebrow. Anything? Marjorie nodded, though fear flickered through her. Very well, then I shall ask you plainly. Eleanor's voice grew softer, deadlier. Who have you been speaking to about me? Marjorie froze. Her lips parted, but no sound emerged. Edmund's pulse thundered. Eleanor moved closer again. Who? Marjorie. Tell me now. The pantry fell silent, but for the sound of Marjorie's unsteady breathing. Edmund saw her struggle, not because she meant to betray anyone, but because she could not betray the truth she had already spoken. Eleanor leaned in. I am waiting. Marjorie whispered, barely audible. I have told no one, my lady. A lie, but one born of desperation. Eleanor's eyes flashed, and in that moment Edmund saw the decision forming behind them. Enough, she said coldly. I will not tolerate another servant in my household who cannot be trusted. You will be removed from the palace at once. Marjorie gasped softly. No, Edmund said under his breath. Eleanor turned toward the door to summon her maid, but before she could call out, heavy footsteps echoed down the corridor, fast, deliberate, approaching the pantry. Eleanor paused. The door flung open, and the king's steward appeared in the doorway, breathless. Your ladyship, there has been an inquiry from the king himself. He demands the presence of the new kitchen boy immediately. Edmund felt Marjorie's breath stop beside him. The king's steward stood in the pantry doorway, blocking out most of the corridor's light, his chest rising and falling with urgency. Lady Eleanor froze mid-turn, surprise flickering across her composed face before she smoothed it away. The king requests him, she repeated, her tone caught between disbelief and irritation. Immediately, the steward confirmed. His voice carried a weight that left no room for delay or argument. He looked directly at Edmund. Come with me at once. For a heartbeat, the pantry seemed suspended in time. Marjorie's fingers clutched the edge of the shelf behind her. Edmund forced his breathing to steady. Lady Eleanor stepped forward, her voice low and sharp. Why would His Majesty concern himself with a kitchen boy? The steward replied with a bow that was respectful but curt. I was not informed of the reason, my lady. Only that he is to be brought to the throne room without delay. Edmund lowered his head and brushed past Eleanor, but not before she levelled a cold, cutting look at him. A warning, a suspicion sharpened to a blade's edge. This is far from over, she whispered. He did not answer. He dared not. Instead, he followed the steward into the hallway. Knowing Marjorie remained behind with Eleanor's gaze fixed on her like a shadow she could not escape. As they walked through the servant corridor and into the broader halls of the palace, Edmund felt his heart pound against his ribs. The steward stayed one step ahead, moving quickly but with purpose. Sir, Edmund murmured cautiously, attempting to keep his voice low, might I know why the king requests me? The steward did not slow. I do not know, he said softly, but I know His Majesty seemed unsettled and concerned that something within these walls is not as it should be. Edmund felt a cold rush sweep through him. The king was not a man easily rattled. They turned the corner toward the main stairwell. A pair of guards glanced briefly at them but said nothing. The steward's urgency was enough to silence questions. Behind them, faint echoes of Marjorie's voice lingered in Edmund's mind. Her tremors, her warnings, the truth she had risked everything to speak. He had to protect her. Whatever the king had summoned him for, he would protect her. They entered the grand stairway, a place Edmund had climbed hundreds of times as a prince but never while dressed as a servant. The marble steps stretched before him, polished and wide, stained with memories of ceremonies, lectures, and expectations. The steward leaned toward him as they climbed. "Keep your head down when we enter. No matter what he asks, show respect." "Yes, sir. And be mindful. There are others in that room. Powerful ones." Edmund swallowed. "I understand." They reached the top of the staircase. The guards before the throne room straightened, hands resting on their belts. The steward approached them and spoke quietly. His Majesty requested the new assistant. "I have brought him." The guards exchanged glances but nodded, stepping aside to open the heavy doors. Edmund entered a room filled with cold daylight. Tall windows stood like silent judges. A handful of nobles waited in a loose arc near the throne, counselors he recognized instantly, though he kept his gaze down as instructed. And then he saw the king. His father stood beside the throne, speaking quietly with the master of the household. When the doors closed behind Edmund, the king looked up. Silence rippled through the chamber as he dismissed the advisers with a gesture. "Leave us." Even without looking directly at his father, Edmund felt the weight of that command. The nobles bowed and retreated, their footsteps echoing until the doors closed again, leaving only the three of them in the vast room. The steward remained by the wall. Edmund stood a few paces from the throne, hands folded in front of him, playing his part to the last thread. The king's voice broke the silence. "Raise your head." Edmund obeyed. The king's eyes narrowed, then widened in recognition and reprimand. Edmund. The name struck the air like a hammer. Edmund lowered his gaze again, but did not deny it. The king stepped closer, his voice dropping sharply. "Explain now." Edmund took a breath, steadying the truth he could no longer hide. "Father, I came to the kitchens to learn the truth of who Lady Eleanor is, to see what court walls hide. And I found more than gossip. I found danger." The king's jaw tightened. "Why would you risk such foolishness?" "Because something felt wrong," Edmund said quietly, "and because no one else would look beyond her charm." The steward's eyes widened slightly, but he remained silent. The king paced slowly, his hands clasped behind him. "You should have come to me, not disguised yourself like some common—" He stopped, controlling his temper. "What did you discover?" Edmund hesitated only a moment. "That Lady Eleanor has no intention of honoring her vows. That she seeks influence, not partnership. And that she speaks of you and of me with contempt she hides from court." The king's expression darkened with disbelief and a father's hurt pride. "Who told you this?" Edmund lifted his chin slightly. "A servant. One who overheard her speak in confidence to her mother." The king's voice sharpened. "And who is this servant?" Edmund hesitated, and that hesitation told the king everything. "You are protecting someone," he said quietly. "A girl." Edmund did not answer. He could not speak Marjorie's name into this room, could not place a target upon her. The king studied him, realization growing slower than suspicion, but heavier than disapproval. "You risked your safety. You risked hers." "Edmund, this is not a game, and if Lady Eleanor learns the truth, she already suspects," Edmund said, "and she means to punish Marjorie for it." The king's expression turned grave. "That woman plays her hand too boldly, even for her rank." The steward stepped forward at last. "Your Majesty, if I may." But the king lifted a hand. "Not now." He returned his focus to Edmund. "You must understand. If word of this reaches the council, they will insist the engagement proceed regardless of character. Alliance stands above personal feeling and above truth." Edmund met his father's gaze fully, his voice steadying with a conviction he had not known he possessed. "Then it falls to me to speak the truth myself. I cannot marry Lady Eleanor." The king stared at him. Edmund expected anger. He expected reprimand. Instead, he saw something closer to resignation, and perhaps something else, something like the quiet stirring of respect. "You have always been your mother's son," the king murmured. "Stubborn in your conscience." Edmund said nothing. At last, the king drew a slow breath. "Very well. I will summon the council and Lady Eleanor. We will speak openly, and her intentions will be questioned." Edmund felt a rush of relief, brief, fleeting, but the king was not finished. Until then, he said, No word of your identity must cross the servant halls. If she learns who you are before I call her forward, she will strike first, and she will not strike at you." Edmund's pulse quickened. "Then I must warn Marjorie." The king held up a firm hand. "Absolutely not. If you go to her now, you will expose everything. Stay here until I send for you." Edmund clenched his jaw. "Father, she is in danger." The king's voice lowered. "And you are the only one who can protect her, which is why you must not risk yourself now. Do not make this worse by acting on impulse." Edmund felt torn, pulled between duty and the fear clawing at him with every heartbeat. The king turned to the steward. "Go. Bring the council." The steward bowed and left swiftly. "Edmund," the king said, "return to the antechamber. Wait until I call." Edmund bowed his head and moved toward the side door. But just as he reached it, the main doors burst open again. The king turned sharply. "Who enters without—" A footman stumbled inside, breathless and pale. "Your Majesty, an urgent matter," there was shouting. "By the servants' stairs." Edmund stiffened. The footman swallowed hard. "It is Lady Eleanor. She was seen heading toward the kitchen, and she has taken guards with her." Edmund did not wait for his father's command. The moment the footman uttered the words "guards and kitchens," he stepped forward with such urgency that the footman stumbled back. The king raised a hand, ready to restrain him, but Edmund spoke before he could. "Father, please. She is going after Marjorie." The king hesitated only a heartbeat. He saw the fear in his son's eyes, the kind no disguise could mask, and he lowered his hand. "Go," he said quietly, "but speak not a word of who you are until I reach you. Do you understand?" "Yes." "Then go swiftly." Edmund bowed, but the gesture was barely complete before he turned and hurried from the throne room. His pulse hammered against his ribs as he sprinted through the long corridors, passing startled servants and confused guards. He ignored every stare, every whispered question. All he could think of was Marjorie, alone, frightened, and defenseless before a woman determined to silence her. He reached the back stairwell that led toward the kitchens. The walls grew narrower, colder. Voices drifted through the stone, too distant to make out, but enough to push him faster. When he reached the lower hall, he slowed, forcing himself to breathe like a servant boy, not a prince on the brink of exposing everything. He stepped into the hallway that led to the kitchen door, and there she was. Marjorie stood beside the long table, her hands folded neatly, her face pale but composed. She seemed to be awaiting instruction, though her eyes flickered anxiously each time the door hinges creaked. The kitchen maids worked around her, unaware that danger drifted only moments behind. Edmund walked straight to her. She saw him, and her breath hitched softly. "You're pale," she whispered. "What happened?" "The king's steward." "Why did he take you?" Edmund shook his head slightly. "Not now." "Are you all right? Did Eleanor speak to you again?" "Not since the pantry," she answered. "But I feel something brewing. Her maid passed the doorway twice. She was searching for someone." He stepped closer, lowering his voice so no one else could hear. "You must keep your head down. Eleanor is coming here with guards." Marjorie's eyes widened. "Guards?" Edmund nodded. "My father has been informed of her intentions and he will intervene, but she may reach you first. I cannot allow that." Marjorie looked at him with a softness that nearly undid him. "Edmund, please be careful." "If she suspects who you truly are," he exhaled shakily. "That cannot matter anymore." He was about to say more, but the sudden slam of a door at the far end of the corridor silenced them. Heavy footsteps followed, echoing sharply against the stone floor. Marjorie's hand instinctively reached for the table, steadying herself. Edmund moved slightly in front of her, shielding her from the hallway's view as much as he could without drawing suspicion. He kept his posture calm, though his heartbeat roared like thunder in his ears. But the figures who entered were not Lady Eleanor's guards. It was the king's steward. He strode toward Edmund with deliberate purpose, stopping only a few steps away. His gaze flicked to Marjorie, then back to Edmund, though his expression revealed nothing. "His Majesty requests your presence again," he announced. Edmund bowed his head. "Yes, sir." Marjorie's eyes filled with questions she did not dare speak. She silently mouthed one word as he turned to follow the steward. "Go." He took a single step, then paused. He turned slightly toward her, just enough that only she could hear him. "You are not alone," he whispered. Her breath trembled. The steward led Edmund back through the narrow halls, then up toward the grand staircase once more. The urgency from before had shifted into something steadier, more controlled. As they walked, the steward finally spoke in a low voice. His Majesty has taken measures. Lady Eleanor will be kept from the kitchens. She will be summoned to the council chamber shortly. Edmund nodded, relief washing over him. Thank you. Do not thank me. Thank your father. And prepare yourself. For what? The truth, the steward murmured. They reached the throne room again, though it was no longer empty. A small assembly of councillors had gathered in hushed clusters near the steps, speaking in urgent tones. The king stood apart, his expression stern, resolute. When Edmund entered, the king dismissed the advisers once more with a curt gesture. They obeyed quickly, stepping aside but remaining in the hall. The king turned to Edmund. Speak plainly now. Do you wish the engagement to Lady Eleanor dissolved? Yes, Edmund said without hesitation. I cannot marry her. The king nodded once, a gesture heavy with understanding. Then this is what must be done, and it must be done with clarity, not with whispers in corridors. Edmund bowed his head. I am ready, father. The king studied his son with quiet gravity. There will be consequences. The council will question your judgment. Allies may turn. But if you stand by the truth, you must stand firm. I will. Then the matter is settled, the king said. Eleanor will be questioned before the full council. Her words will reveal her intentions, and any servant who has been threatened, your cook included, shall be protected. Marjorie. Her name rested in Edmund's mind like a fragile treasure. The king placed a hand on Edmund's shoulder. You have grown more than you realize, and though you acted recklessly, your courage has brought truth to light. Edmund felt a quiet surge of emotion, relief, gratitude, and something like strength rising in him. The king stepped back. You may return to your quarters until you are summoned. Eleanor will be addressed swiftly, and the matter with the young cook will be resolved. She will not be punished. Edmund exhaled. Thank you. He turned toward the door, but the king spoke again. Edmund, he paused. There is something else you must consider. If the engagement is dissolved, the council will expect you to choose a bride of appropriate standing within the year. Edmund felt the air shift around him, of appropriate standing, a phrase that echoed quietly through his mind. He lowered his head. I understand. But the king's voice softened. Standing is earned in more ways than one, my son. Edmund lifted his gaze, surprised by the unexpected gentleness there. The king nodded as though dismissing the heaviness of the moment. Go, rest. All will unfold in its time. Edmund bowed deeply and stepped out of the throne room. The corridors beyond felt different, lighter somehow. The storm that had been building for days was beginning to break, without the destruction he had feared. The truth would come to light. Eleanor would be confronted, and Marjorie, at last. She would be safe. He walked slowly, letting the weight inside him settle. His father had not rebuked him. The council would hear the truth. The kingdom would not force him into a loveless future. And Marjorie, she had told him she would choose the truth again, even if it cost her everything. Now it was his turn to choose. He reached the lower staircase and paused, leaning his hand lightly against the cold railing. His heart no longer raced with panic. Instead, it beat with a quiet clarity he had never known before. He would tell her everything, not in a pantry, not in passing, but in the open, as himself, without disguise, without fear, and without duty forcing him into silence. Tomorrow, once the council had dissolved the engagement and Eleanor's schemes had been confronted, he would seek Marjorie. He would speak the truth that had grown with each hour spent beside her. He would tell her who he was, and more importantly, he would tell her what she had become to him. He closed his eyes briefly, steadying himself for the path ahead. For the first time since stepping into the kitchens in disguise, he felt the ground beneath him steady and sure. The storm was ending. And something new, something fragile, something luminous, was waiting on the other side. The palace awoke with a murmur that spread from corridor to corridor like a cautious sigh. Servants whispered about the king's summons. Footmen hurried with messages. Even the guards kept glancing toward the council chamber, as though expecting truth itself to burst through the doors. By mid-morning, everyone understood one thing. Lady Eleanor had been called before the council, and the news was not in her favour. Edmund waited in a small antechamber near the council hall, dressed once more in his princely attire. The disguise was gone. The plain linen shirt lay folded on a chair across the room, a quiet reminder of the world he had stepped into, and the woman who had changed it for him. The council's voices rose in scattered bursts through the thick door. Accusations, denials, Eleanor's defiant words, his father's calm, unwavering responses. Edmund stood, unable to sit still. His heart was not in the council room. It was downstairs in the kitchen wing, where a young cook waited without knowing her life was changing with each passing moment. At last, the door opened. The king stepped out, his expression firm but relieved. "It is done," he said. Edmund moved closer. "And the engagement?" Dissolved. Edmund breathed deeply, the weight lifting from his shoulders all at once. Eleanor attempted to defend herself, the king continued, but the council heard enough to act. "She will leave the palace quietly by the end of the day. Her influence ends here." Edmund nodded. He did not rejoice in Eleanor's fall, though the relief inside him was undeniable. Instead, he bowed his head respectfully. "Thank you, father." "There is one matter left," the king said, lowering his voice, "and this one is yours alone to resolve." Edmund met his gaze. "I know. She is still in the kitchens," the king added. "Her service is secured. No one will harm her now." Edmund felt a faint smile rise. "Then allow me to go to her." "Go," the king said with a gentle nod, "and speak the truth you hid for far too long." Edmund left the council chamber, walking through halls that felt wider than they ever had before. Sunlight struck the windows in pale streaks, lighting his way. Every servant he passed bowed instinctively, though some exchanged confused glances at seeing the prince appear so suddenly in places where he had rarely walked openly. He took the back stairwell. It was the same stairwell he had climbed as a disguised kitchen worker, carrying sacks of potatoes and trays of bread. But today he carried something entirely different, the resolve to speak what had grown inside him, quiet and persistent as breath. As he descended the last step, he heard the familiar clatter of morning labor. The kitchen bustled with trays and utensils, though there was a subdued tension in the air, whispers carried from one end of the room to the other. Edmund stepped inside. Every sound stopped. Knives paused mid-cut. Bread baskets froze mid-passing. A pot nearly boiled over before a maid startled and pulled it from the fire. Cooks and scullery maids stood stunned as the crown prince walked through the kitchen door with calm purpose. Edmund scanned the room only once before he found her. Marjorie stood near the side table where she always worked, a tray of vegetables before her. Her hands hovered above them, motionless. Her eyes were wide, uncertain. She looked as though she had forgotten how to breathe. Edmund crossed the kitchen toward her. The servants parted instinctively, some bowing, others simply staring in open disbelief. When he stopped in front of her, Marjorie lowered her gaze at once. "Your Highness." Her voice trembled. He had heard her speak hundreds of words with courage, yet these two seemed the hardest of all. Edmund spoke softly. "Marjorie, look at me." She did. Slowly. Fear and confusion glimmered in her eyes, mixed with a trembling hope she tried to hide. "I owe you the truth," Edmund said, "more truth than I should have withheld." "You owe me nothing," she whispered. "But I do," he said gently, "and I will speak it now." He took a quiet breath. "When I came to the kitchens, I hoped to understand the world beyond duty. I did not expect to find someone who showed me more honesty in a single day than the court has shown me in years." Marjorie's lips parted, but she said nothing. Edmund continued, his voice steady. "You spoke the truth even when it endangered you. You protected me without knowing who I was, and you faced Lady Eleanor with more courage than many nobles in my father's court." Her breath trembled. "I only did what was right." He stepped a little closer. "And because you did, I stand here now, free, clear, and grateful." She pressed her fingers to the edge of the table, steadying herself. "Your Highness, you should not thank me. I was only a cook who overheard what she should not have heard." "You were the only one brave enough to speak," Edmund replied. A few servants lingered at the edges of the kitchen, pretending to work but listening with held breaths. Marjorie swallowed softly. "What will become of me now?" Edmund felt a tug at his heart, the fragile fear behind her question. He spoke with warmth he could not disguise. That depends entirely on you. She blinked. On me? Edmund nodded. Because I have a truth of my own to offer. The kitchen was silent. Even the fire in the hearth seemed to crackle more softly. Edmund's voice lowered, intimate enough that only she could truly hear it. When I stepped into these kitchens in disguise, I found more than answers. I found you. Your kindness, your courage, your honesty. Day after day, I found myself drawn back to your side. And I learned something I never expected to learn in the midst of pots and steam. Marjorie's breath caught. Edmund, he shook his head gently. Let me finish. I began this journey to escape a loveless marriage. And I ended it by discovering someone I could never have imagined, someone who saw me before she knew my name. She stared at him, her eyes shining with quiet emotion. Your Highness, I am not someone the court would accept. I have no title, no dowry, no family of standing. I cannot walk beside you in the places you belong. Edmund reached out slowly, giving her every chance to pull away. She did not. You stood beside me in the only place that mattered, he whispered, when the truth was at stake, and that is worth more than any lineage. She shook her head faintly. But the council, they will oppose. He smiled softly. My father has already reminded me. Standing is earned in more ways than one. I choose whom I walk beside, and I choose you. Marjorie pressed a trembling hand to her mouth. Her eyes glistened as tears formed, not of sorrow but of a hope she had never dared allow. Edmund gently took her hand from her lips, holding it with quiet reverence. Marjorie, you changed my world long before I learned your history, and if you will give me your heart, I will spend my life giving you mine. The kitchen erupted in a soft gasp. A few maids stared openly. The head cook herself nearly dropped the ladle she was holding. Marjorie felt her voice falter. Your Highness, I'm afraid. Of what? He asked softly. Of wanting something I have no right to want. He stepped closer, his forehead almost touching hers. Then let me give you the right. She closed her eyes, as a tear slipped down her cheek. Edmund spoke again, barely a whisper. Marjorie, will you walk beside me? Not as a servant, not in secret, but as the woman who changed the course of my life. Her voice broke as she answered. Yes. He caught her hands in his, holding them as though they had been meant for his all along. She breathed a shaky laugh, half disbelief, half joy. He brushed her tear with his thumb. Come with me. Now, she whispered. Now. He led her out of the kitchen slowly, giving the stunned servants a gentle nod as they stepped aside. The hallway outside felt different, brighter, filled with the promise of a life neither had ever imagined. The palace seemed to hush around them as they walked. Sunlight poured through the high windows, touching Marjorie's face like a blessing. Every step took her farther from fear, closer to a future she had never dared dream. Edmund guided her to the upper corridor outside the throne room. There the king waited beside the doorway. His expression softened when he saw the young woman at Edmund's side. Marjorie halted, frozen in place. Your Majesty, The king raised a hand, silencing her with warmth rather than command. You did a brave thing, my girl. Few would have done the same. Marjorie lowered her head, overwhelmed. The king looked at his son, then back at her. Edmund has chosen his path, and I will not stand in the way of a heart guided by truth. Marjorie's breath shook. Sir, I do not wish to be a burden to the crown. The king smiled gently. Then do not be. Simply stand beside my son with the honesty you showed when no one else dared speak it. She blinked hard, struggling to steady herself. Edmund squeezed her hand. The king continued, his tone quiet but sure. The council will resist, of course. They always do. But hearts such as yours shine more brightly than titles, and the realm has grown dim with people who have forgotten what sincerity looks like. Marjorie lifted her gaze, unsure whether she had truly heard him correctly. My dear, the king said, if my son wishes to offer you his hand, then you may accept it without fear. She turned to Edmund, her breath catching. He smiled, a smile she had seen in fragments, in moments of secrecy, but never fully, freely, without disguise. Marjorie, he whispered, walk with me, as my equal, as the woman I love. Her lips trembled. Then she said the words that had been waiting quietly, growing in the spaces between every shared glance, every whispered warning, Every moment she feared she would lose him. "I love you." Edmund drew her close, not in the polished manner expected of royalty, but in the simple, heartfelt way of a man who had finally found the one truth he wished to keep forever. His forehead rested against hers, and he breathed her name like a vow. "Marjorie." Servants passed quietly down the corridors, offering subtle, knowing smiles. A few council members paused at a respectful distance, whispering but not daring to interrupt. The king stepped aside, giving them space as though understanding that this moment belonged to them alone. Marjorie felt the world around her shift, not with fear this time, but with possibility. She had once entered the palace with nothing but skill and a quiet hope for a stable life. Now she stood in the heart of it, holding the hand of a man who saw her worth more clearly than any title ever could. Edmund spoke softly. "Whatever comes next, we will face it together." She nodded. Together. A breeze drifted in from an open balcony, lifting a strand of her hair. Edmund brushed it back gently, his touch full of tenderness. He took her hand again, guiding her toward the balcony where sunlight glowed across the marble floor. Outside, the gardens stretched in quiet splendor. A new day was unfolding, warm, clear, and full of promise. Edmund turned to her. "Marjorie, will you give me the honor of calling you my wife?" Her breath caught, soft, radiant, full of joy she could not contain. "Yes," she whispered, "yes." He gathered her into his arms, holding her as though he had been waiting his entire life to do so. She clung to him, laughing softly against his shoulder, her tears warm with gratitude and wonder. When they parted, their eyes remained locked in a silent vow, one built not on duty or arrangement or expectation, but on truth, choice and love, grown in the unlikeliest of places. And after a long, breathless moment, Edmund kissed her, gentle, reverent, full of the promise of every dawn their future would hold. Behind them, the palace watched in respectful silence. Before them, a life built on honesty and courage waited, open and welcoming, ready to begin. Thank you so much for listening to this story all the way to the end. We hope it moved you as much as it moved us while telling it. We'd love to hear your thoughts. Leave us a comment telling us where you're listening from and what you like the most. Rate this story from 0 to 10. What score would you give it? If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and leave a like as a show of support. That really motivates us to keep creating and sharing more stories full of emotion and life lessons. And before we go, we want to remind you that an exciting and heartwarming story recommendation will appear on the final screen. If you'd like to enjoy it, just click on the video. Thank you once again for being here, and we'll see you in the next story.